Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I have here delivering the quarterly report webinar to shareholders and other interested investors, the team from Emyria, the leaders, Rennie, who's the Chief Operating Officer, and Executive Chairman, Mr. Greg Hutchinson, who'll be running us through what we think are the key highlights of what was a very busy and successful quarter, what the company is focused on right now, and what we hope to be looking forward to in the coming weeks and months. I'll just remind we'll have some time for some questions at the end of this, and we'll also be recording this webinar for distribution. So I'm going to hand it over to Marianne and Greg.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Pete. It's certainly been a busy quarter, in fact, a busy couple of years really for Emyria. Very exciting time. We've built a lot of momentum going into calendar year 2026. I'm Executive Chair. As some of you might know, I've got a 35-year history in running, managing, owning and building medical clinics across different disciplines and across the country at scale. I worked in general practice, physiotherapy, occupational medicine, and even in stereotactic radiosurgery. But I can honestly say I've never been involved in something where it's not just the company that has first mover advantage, it's that the country has first mover advantage. Just to recap, back in July of 2023, the Australian Therapeutic Goods Administration moved to formally reschedule MDMA with the street name of ecstasy and psilocybin, street name of magic mushrooms, from Schedule 9 prohibited substances to Schedule 8 controlled drugs. And what that meant was that under very strictly controlled circumstances, psychiatrists who had gained authorised prescriber status, in other words, they had submitted to ethics committee a treatment protocol and had that endorsed, and then gone to the TGA to get authorised prescriber status, could now prescribe these two medications for the treatment of PTSD and treatment-resistant depression, respectively, in combination with therapy. So that was in July of 2023. By November of that year, Marianne, Emyria had purpose-built a facility here in Perth and commenced treatment. And over the course of the next 18 months or so, delivered that treatment PTSD to approximately 30 patients, all of whom had to fund the treatment, which admittedly is quite expensive in their own right, because at that time there were no third-party payers to pay for the treatment. In fact, two of those people came from overseas, because in talking about Australia having first mover advantage, one from Germany and one from the United States, Australia was and remains the only jurisdiction in the world to have formalised these treatment protocols on a national basis. Now, in a huge sign of validation for the protocols that Emyria is rolling out, in June of last year, Australia's largest private health insurer in Medibank Private announced that they would begin funding eligible members through the treatment protocols and funding the treatment in its entirety. And by August of last year, Emyria had built another purpose-built facility, this time in Perth Clinic, which is a private mental health hospital here in Perth, and had commenced treatment for Medibank patients in that facility. Later, we then announced and have started to execute on our national clinic rollout strategy and have built and started the treatment in Brisbane, and that commenced just before Christmas. So a lot has happened over the course of the quarter, and I'll now hand over to Marianne, who can probably share some of the more specifics in terms of the activities that went on during that December quarter. Over to you, Marianne.
Thanks, Greg. I'll just echo what a significant quarter it was for us in terms of growth for the company, and we're really thrilled with the milestones that we've managed to achieve over the quarter. Extremely busy. Look, we saw really positive revenue growth, which was positive between September and December, or October and December. We also announced our first Victorian site with one of our hospital partners, Aviv. So this means that when that's operational, aiming for Q2 this year, we'll be in 3 states, being Western Australia, Queensland, and Victoria. We were very thrilled to see that the DVA announced that they would fund eligible members for the treatment of PTSD and treatment-resistant depression, meaning that there are dual reimbursement pathways that we now see. We also completed a really strong institutional placement, which is here to support our national growth strategy. We expanded our Perth clinic site, and so we secured additional beds, and we also grew our clinical team. So we added additional authorised prescribers and recruited further therapists to actually then deliver the treatment. We also commenced dosing at our Brisbane site, so that became operational. And finally, we actually expanded our agreement with Aviv Health, meaning that we now have exclusive rights across to be able to set up clinics in all of their existing and future sites. So, as I say, an extremely busy quarter for us. The other thing to note, which is post the quarter, we announced yesterday some 12-month results of our data, which were very promising to see. So for our PTSD program, of the patients that have now been post 12 months from their treatment, we saw that 76% of those individuals had a clinically significant improvement in their symptoms, and 2/3 of those patients are now, not meeting the criteria for PTSD, so deemed to be in recovery or remission. And what this shows to us is that these treatments can be durable and lasting. So we're very buoyed by those outcomes. Big quarter, Greg.
Certainly was, Marianne.
Yeah.
So in terms of the outlook going forward, our strategy is rather straightforward, and we have already started to execute on that. Marianne and the team are working tirelessly to execute on a national clinical rollout and to accelerate that. So the announcements that we've made with the Victorian clinic, that'll make 4 clinics that we have, but our objective is to roll out another 4 clinics across the course of this calendar year to double our capacity. And it's about building capacity over the course of this calendar year, and then turn our attention to utilisation and strengthen that aspect once we have a truly national footprint. At the same time, we're looking to roll out a national training program and expand our national clinical workforce in advance of the expansion geographically from a clinical network perspective. We also need to make sure that we can support our veterans, and with the Department of Veterans Affairs announcement just before Christmas that they will support veterans through this program. It leads us to different types of protocols and different types of community settings that we might be able to deploy over the course, perhaps not of 2026, but maybe going into 2027. And we also need to support workers' compensation cohorts, because we know that there are a significant number of people who are on workers' compensation for mental health related illness. And we're doing that all backed by a very strong balance sheet, some 10.5 million in the bank. And we mustn't forget, we've got in excess of $11 million worth of placement and loyalty options that are in the money at the moment, and have seen some of that money start to come in through options being exercised. So as I say, the activity this year will continue to accelerate. We've built a lot of momentum out of the December quarter. Interested to hear if anybody's got any questions, Pete, but a very exciting time for Emyria, for the business, and indeed for the entire psychiatric community.
Thank you, Marianne and Greg. It was a pretty busy quarter, and in fact the whole year. There were many milestones that were reported via the ASX platform and to shareholders, and the company made some real headway, not only in the treatment solution that you're providing to that range of patients, and it's a large number of patients that you can apply it to, but also in the rollout of the clinics and the agreements with both Medibank and Department of Veterans Affairs, which really signifies that the confidence in what you're doing is really there at the highest level. So on that note, and with the rollout of the clinics in Perth and the East Coast, can you discuss the revenue you'll expect to see from this expansion versus the revenue that's reflected in the December quarter? Because unlike some other industries with contractual payments, with Emyria's business model and the patient treatment plans, there's a delay to the revenue coming through from the time of patient assignment and onboarding to when that money is then banked and you can then, report it. So it might be good for our audience to understand a little bit about that, because we're seeing the great news about the rollouts and new clinics and new beds and patients onboarding, but it'd be nice for us to understand when the company can report that sort of flow and possibly what you're expecting.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's obviously early days in terms of having formalised treatment protocols and utilisation modelling in place. But our modelling shows that a 4-bed facility will accommodate only around 250 patients in a year. So it's a rather boutique service that we're offering, but obviously high margins, low volume, as opposed to, say, a general practice, which is the other way around. We're modelling that it'll take between 9 and 12 months from the start of operations in a particular clinic to get up to anything like those levels. But our main aim, as we keep saying, is to roll out clinics at pace across the country. So get a geographic footprint in place in the first instance, and then look at utilisation down the track. It does take time to get authorised prescriber status. So we know that it can take 8 to 12 weeks for an individual psychiatrist to get that status. So we need to go through that process, train up therapists, onboard therapists, and then onboard patients thereafter. So there is a lag, as you described, between the time that we might announce a particular venue, for example, the Mornington Peninsula one, and by the time we get to operations, and then by the time utilisation starts to kick in. Yes, there is a lag, but ultimately those sorts of patient numbers are where we'd like to head.
And you sort of covered a couple of these next questions. The pipeline of potential patients is quite large, and the ability for the company to draw on that pipeline and have referrals come through the pipeline will be probably dependent upon your scaling and staffing ability to cope with that. What do you think typically is the process between recognition of a patient who's being referred by their psychiatrist or GP into the onboarding, and then to the time of their first treatment?
Thanks, Pete. I'll take that one. Look, it varies. It's dependent on the individual's clinical needs, but typically, you may be patients referred in, and then they'll be seen or screened to determine their eligibility 4 to 6 weeks later. Once they're determined to be eligible, then they will be, potentially tapering off their medication, which may take another 4 to 6 weeks, and then they'll move into active treatment, which is then again another 6 to 8 weeks with, typically fortnightly dosing cycles. So, and I think you've queried me on this before, but you also asked around, and then when do you expect payment then comes after that? Now, the way it's structured is you typically are receiving payment along the course of the treatment.
That's the answer we're looking for. And look, I'm probably paraphrasing this question, but can you discuss generally the referral process? Are there, I guess it's part awareness question, the awareness amongst the GP and psychiatric community about Emyria's treatment, is it broad? Are you finding a demand from that side of the equation to look for the opportunity to refer patients?
Yeah, look, we're seeing a strong referral base, which is really positive. We do educate and market only to clinicians, so GPs and psychiatrists and the like. They're typically the ones who are referring potential patients into us for these treatments. So we're really buoyed to see that there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of education to take place to make sure there's proper understanding of the course of these treatments. But we for example, just to give you an idea, because we do look at these metrics, in November alone, we had 62 new referrers to our clinic. So that's really positive to see, and we track these things closely. We do a lot of kind of activities to get our information out to these clinicians.
It's a good number, 62, and it's only going to keep growing, which should be very positive. But 2025 was a year of real foundation for the company and tremendous milestone agreements with significant funders such as Medibank and DVA. Can you talk to the audience about the number of clinics and treatment beds currently in operation on the East and West Coasts and the potential numbers you expect to see now that you've got the process rolling, perhaps in the coming, 6 months or so?
Yeah, sure. Look, we've currently got 11 active beds in our operational clinics. So that's 2 in Perth and 1 in Brisbane. Once Victoria comes on board, that will change to 14 beds. Now, 14 beds, operating 5 days a week would mean 70 dosing days per week. So we've got capacity for 70 dosing days per week. To Greg's point, that's capacity, and then it's growing the utilisation and actually filling those beds. And then to the end of your question, what does it look like for the rest of the year? Well, if we were to say add an additional 4 clinics onto it, that bed capacity may grow to say 28 to 30, which means it's 140 to 150 dosing days per week.
Looking forward to that scaling, and I'm sure the shareholders are as well. And that's sort of part of this next question, reinforcing that the clinics are usually in your facilities are within clinics that are for-purpose installations. They're hospitals, they're healthcare facilities, and not just any old house down the street. We've seen agreements such as those announced with Aviv. Can you discuss the demand or the opportunity within the industry from other institutions and those healthcare groups who operate in the landscape that want to engage with Emyria? It wouldn't take much for a large hospital operations group to say, right, we need to have this in our network and in our business model to be full treatment operators. So I wonder how that engagement is progressing.
Well, I'll probably take that one, Marianne. So, Pete, I guess the easiest way to discuss that is that we've embarked on a capital light strategy, as you know, to look at hospital integrated centres in the first instance as we roll out across the country. So we're in active talks with a number of hospital operators. One of the most pleasing aspects of that is that some of them have approached us having heard of our reputation elsewhere and our operations elsewhere, and have confidence in our ability to roll out the services within their facilities. So that's incredibly profound from a reputational standpoint, and demonstrates, I guess, some of the benefit of that first mover advantage I discussed early on. And then there's, as I said earlier, the opportunity for community-based clinics ultimately to service some of the other cohorts, including Veterans Affairs and Workers' Compensation, because it's only really private health insurance related patients that need to be serviced in a hospital-based setting. Otherwise, DVA and Workers' Compensation patients can certainly be serviced in a community setting, and that would be an environment where we can perhaps do more than the 3 or 4 bed type scenario that often avails us in a hospital setting, because obviously hospitals don't want to give up too many of their own beds.
The other question I was going to talk to was, in some of the presentations we'd seen earlier, there was a little bit of inbound traffic from overseas interest, from people that can't access this sort of treatment in their own countries, Germany, the US, countries like that. I know we've had some inquiry. Have you seen any further growth from that sort of inquiry?
It's not something that we've gone out to actively promote, simply because there are so many millions of Australians. So the domestic market is suffering with these conditions. So the domestic market is huge. And ultimately, I can see that there is an overseas market. And so medical tourism potentially does become a significant reality. But in the first instance, our objective is fairly simple. Let's get a national footprint in place. Let's make sure that we're able to bring these treatments to as many Australians as we possibly can, and then we can embark on a strategy that looks perhaps at the overseas market as well.
And Greg and Marianne, subsequent to the end of the quarter, we had the announcement out earlier reporting some of the success of the treatments. Would you like to just talk to that announcement just to round off, and then perhaps some of the potential milestones we can look forward to?
Yeah, I'll speak to the data, Pete. I mean, look, we're really buoyed by these outcomes. As I was saying, it's showing us that this is a durable and lasting treatment for those 2/3 of the population of those patients that we have seen now meeting that 12-month data point are still within remission. But we've seen great back to work statistics as well from those individuals who weren't working at the time, and on top of that, close to 80% of those individuals are seeing a clinically significant improvement in their scores, which is really positive. And for us as a company, this is important to be able to demonstrate because it's going to be important for payer discussions, etc., to be able to show this kind of extended data.
I just want to remind our viewers that investment in Emyria also helps change lives for the positive. So that's a great company to have in your portfolio. We don't have any.
Nice to work in a company that is actually, at the core of it, is making significant impact on those really struggling with severe mental health conditions.
And perhaps if we enlarge on that, because the company is performing very strongly, and the team is working really hard and progressing very quickly. In fact, more quickly than probably what we might have anticipated, which is terrific from an investment perspective. But from a shareholder stance, I think it's really important to recognise that we are having an incredibly profound impact on patients, their families, loved ones, friends, colleagues, but probably also a very important impact on society more broadly, in that a lot of these people are reintegrating back into society and becoming, a lot of them have been suicidal at their wits' end, and are now reintegrating back into society. I think we should all be incredibly proud as shareholders of the work that our practitioners are performing. And from a payer perspective, Marianne's right, they will see that patients or their members are able to get off the merry-go-round that is recurrent hospitalisation and treatment otherwise.
Yeah, there's a wonderful ripple effect there, Greg. So we look forward to seeing the numbers at the end of the year and how many lives have been positively affected from the therapy, which is really wonderful. Unless you've got any other messages there for shareholders, we will wind it up. We've finished our questions run here. I'll remind everybody that they can stay in touch with what's happening by signing up to the LinkedIn platform for Emyria. There's lots of good information coming through from both an industry and the market front. And also at the website, if they sign up there and put their details in, they'll be on top of all news flow coming from the company. So this video is being recorded. It'll be made available for everybody watching and for those who didn't make it today. And we thank you all for attending. Thank you, Marianne and Greg. And we look forward to hearing the more positive news as soon as we can.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.